and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. My name is Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my favorite gardener, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
The podcast will be strong if the roots are strong.
There's spring, summer, fall, winter, and then spring again. Brilliant.
It's amazing.
This week on the show, it is time once again for another of our Doof Canon episodes. Matt, tell the people what this means.
Well, once a month, those individuals that donate to us on Patreon at the Council of Doof level get to collectively decide on a movie for the community to consider for entrance into the Doof Canon. And then Scott and I and maybe some guests will meet, talk about the movie, and then present our case for why it should or should not be admitted.
But as always, we are leaving the final decision up to you folks at home. So stick around, listen to our arguments, and then find the link in the show notes of this episode, which will send you over to our Patreon account, which will have a poll for yes or no. That's a 50-50 poll. You pick one of those, and you help influence whether or not this movie is admitted into the canon. Matt, what has our council brought for us this month?
This month, the council has brought the 1979 classic film, Being There.
A surprise from our Patreon, I think.
Yes, an appreciated surprise, a delightful surprise.
Inches of snow that fell over the whole weekend, and the blizzard is called
Good morning,
the
Louise.
worst in that city's history.
Dead, Janet. The old man's dead.
I see.
It shows, because posture reading.
Well, Mr. Chance, I have no alternative but to inform you that this house is now closed. If indeed you have resided here, you have no legal right to remain. You'll have to move out by, let's say, noon tomorrow.
I don't understand move out.
Summary of Being There is as follows. After the death of his employer forces him out of the only home he's ever known, a simple-minded, sheltered gardener becomes an unlikely trusted advisor to a powerful tycoon and an insider in Washington politics.
This movie was written by Jerzy Kosinski and Robert C. Jones. It was directed by the Hal Ashby, and it stars Peter Sellers and Shirley MacLaine. Matt, tell me what you thought about Hal Ashby's Being There.
I thought it was utterly delightful. I had never seen this before somehow. This is one of those 70s classic comedies that in some sense is foundational, you could say. I mean, it feels like a kind of satire that I've been seeing echoes of my whole life.
Sure.
And maybe this is where those echoes originated. Obviously everything comes from somewhere, and this got its inspiration from somewhere else. But this is such a well done, just perfectly done satire. And I loved it. What did you think?
Yeah, I adored this movie. I didn't know what to expect with it. Or maybe I should say I thought I knew what to expect from it, and it wasn't what I expected at all. Because you see Peter Sellers, and a lot of things, go off in your mind, right? You think of Dr. Strangelove. You think of the Pink Panther series. You think this guy, this master of comedy, who is, I think, a master of comedy, one of the best comedians of all time. I think I can definitely agree with that statement now. And you think it's going to be a certain thing. And this performance that Peter Sellers gives in this movie is one of the most muted, straight, like he's doing the same thing for 2 hours, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it is quiet, it is subtle, and it's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. But like he has to keep this same muted line throughout the entire movie, and he does it, and he succeeds at it. And it's the type of thing where you like, I if you would have told me that before I watched this movie, I said, there's no way that works. There's no way that works. And yet it does. The movie is hilarious. The movie is so funny. It's a perfect satire. But I mean, speaking of Dr. Strangelove, it's a completely different kind of satire.
Mm-hmm.
This is a kind of satire that I think is super subtle, actually. In it's like, I think there's definitely people watching this movie who just didn't get the satire at all, possibly.
Possibly. I think it's great. It's one of it's of the ilk of movie where the main character doesn't have an arc. It's actually everyone rotating around them, like they are already in some sense perfect. And I choose that word intentionally because the movie ends with him walking on water. Um,
Becoming Jesus himself. Yeah.
Becoming a kind of savior figure, and
Yeah.
it's kind of great because the movie's not really making fun of him at all, right?
No.
Maybe I overstate that, but like he is this, he makes these simple folksy observations that are absolutely always him misunderstanding what's going on. And then the people around him are the butt of the joke because they react as if he's said something profound and metaphorical, and they're also self-serious. And when somebody says something they don't understand, they just assume that they're too stupid.
Yeah.
So it's poking holes in the vanity and self-delusion and sort of intellectual emptiness of our ruling class, in all sorts of different ways, all sorts of different fun ways. And he is the needle that is doing the poking, so he's not really the brunt of the joke. I'm reminded of something I saw Bryan Cranston say in an interview where he said the character, the actor in a comedy can never behave as though what's happening is funny, which is exactly like the reason why this works with Peter Sellers is it like you said, played absolutely consistently. I mean, it's actually kind of a great dramatic. There's a great dramatic through line underneath the satire and the comedy,
Totally,
which is also great.
This poor man, like, you know, like you feel sad for him at a lot of times throughout this movie because he just his life is so simple and like he doesn't understand the things that are happening to him. Like, I think it's really interesting. This is a very slow roll of a movie. I said to you earlier today that I couldn't believe that like it was not till 45 minutes in the movie that Peter Sellers' character first comes in contact with Benjamin Rand, which is like the whole conceit of the movie is he ends up with this incredibly rich, powerful man who thinks he's brilliant somehow. But it takes 45 minutes to get to that scene. And part of that is because the movie spends a long time with Peter Sellers just walking the streets of America, right? Like he leaves the safety of the house he's lived at his entire life, the house he's never left. He walks out into the streets and he just wanders America. And it's, I mean, part of the brilliance of the satire here is the movie is just showing us what 1970s America looks like, what the struggle of the average citizen in 1970s America was. You know, he walks out of this beautiful house with this wonderful garden, and it's like a rich, lavish house, into a dump, like buildings abandoned and knocked down, people sitting out on the streets, and he's just wandering through this world. And it doesn't have to say anything about the world to present this contrast to us, and the Hal Ashby's decision to really let this play out to a point where it's like, man, he's been walking for like 10 minutes while this version of the why am I blanking on the name of the song, the 2001 Space Odyssey.
It's Thus Big Zarathustra, right? It's some version of that. It was a kind of altered cover of that is playing the entire time. It's like a good 10 minutes. I don't know. I'm fascinated by that and how it does it and how he kind of wanders into this situation he gets himself in. And so the movie really takes its time. It really does. It's a slow roll of a movie. It's very like, it's not a bombastic movie. Like the wildest and craziest this movie gets, I think, is the quote unquote sex scene between Peter Sellers and Shirley MacLaine's character. It is the most this movie airs towards slapstick. And that's one small moment in a very big 2 hour and 10 minute movie, where it's mostly just this kind of very sharp, pointed critique of society told
completely straight by this wonderful character. It's a fascinating movie. I'm kind of just blown away by it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think I might even enjoy it more on a second viewing. And I say that because I don't really enjoy or do well with cringe humor. And the funny thing is, the movie isn't really doing cringe humor, but there's always this fear in the back of your mind that he's going to get found out and this is all going to fall apart.
Yeah.
Which is a funny way of saying it, right? Because it's not even like he's lying. He's just doesn't really understand what's happening and thinks this is all normal.
Right.
But like, what you watch the whole movie, you realize like, oh, the joke here is that he is never found out. The closest that he comes to being found out is that the physician clocks what's really going on with him, but then he doesn't say anything about it because he realizes that it would break the old man's heart and there's really no good to be gained from it. So he just kind of lets it go. And which is kind of a beautiful sentiment in and of itself, that where he's like, I'm just gonna let it go. It's fine.
That's the wild thing about this movie is it's satirical, it's pointed, but it's also profound and beautiful and touching in a lot of ways too. Like the relationship between Chauncey Gardner and Benjamin Rand is an absurd relationship, right? It's some of the most pointed humor of the thing is how this man falls deeply in love with Chauncey Gardner, despite him saying nothing or like really understanding nothing. Like that's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. But also there's an emotional core to that relationship that's beautiful, right? Like Peter Sellers cries when Rand dies, right?
Yeah.
And that is such a stark difference between how the movie showed Peter Sellers react to the death of the old man whose house he lived at his entire life, right? Like, he just went back to watching TV. And in this moment, we see him cry. We see this affect him emotionally. And so there is something about that relationship that is not just a joke. And yeah, I love the doctor character because it's such a subversion of that exact thing you were thinking about, right? Like we have the Washington Post people trying to find out who this guy is. We have the CIA and the FBI all pointing fingers at each other for why they can't find out who this guy is. And then we have the doctor kind of quietly doing his own investigation. And you think this is all going to come to a head. This is going to be the moment of conflict where he is exposed for who he actually is. And then the only man who figured it out makes that beautiful choice to just be like, no, it's not going to do any good to expose. And usually even expose him is the wrong word, because you're right. He's not knowingly lying about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. He just thinks that these are some nice people that he ran into. And now he is lucky enough to get to stay with them, and they seem to like him and he likes them. And he basically, I think his understanding is that they want him to be their gardener, basically.
Yeah.
And it makes perfect sense to him. Like the movie, that's the fun, like the really clever thing about the writing is it never breaks its own rules. There's never a moment where Chauncey Gardner, the character, does something that character wouldn't do. He's always just like, I'm just a gardener. People keep asking me my opinions about things, and I don't understand what you're saying. Oh yeah, I mean, I can give you an opinion on gardening, though.
Yeah.
And then and like all of his, when he dismisses a question because he doesn't understand it, he comes off as like, aloof and powerful. And when he gives a gardening answer, he comes off as cryptic and metaphorical and erudite. But at no point does the movie like break the rule and have him kind of do or say something that he wouldn't do. And like you just pointed out, he cried when his when the man died, and I loved that moment because like he says something, I don't remember exactly the words, but he says something like, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
This happens to old people, and it's just very like it's just a sort of simple childish way of him processing this tragedy.
Yeah.
And it's not funny at all. It just is honest.
Yeah. I think the only kind of conceit that the movie needs to work is the idea where it's not really a cheat, but just the central idea that Chauncey will fake it every time someone asks him a question he doesn't fully understand. Well, not every time, but sometimes he just says, I don't understand the question. And yeah, they see that as tough guy posturing. But sometimes he'll just say yes if he doesn't know, right? He'll just be like, yeah, I agree. Like he'll just, and I think that's realistic. I think that, like, speaking of children, you ask a kid a question. I asked my son a question he doesn't understand. He's just like, yeah, all the time. So I do think that's realistic, but that's the movie kind of requires that to operate in some ways sometimes.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, just for the sake of humor, I think the answer, like, have you ever had sex with a man? I don't think so. where he's really just so like, good. I have no idea what you're asking.
Yeah.
But that is funny, right? And like so much of that is Seller's performance of like choosing like the perfect way to do it, where it's both authentic and hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
That's
what a freaking master. What a master. He died, I think, right after this movie came out. Really? Actually, he died in 1980. So. He tried to get this movie made for like a decade. He bought the rights to the book in 1970, and it wasn't until 79 that he could actually make it. And part of that is, his career had kind of taken a swing. And I think it was the Pink Panther movies that really brought him back into prominence. And he was able to use that capital to get this movie made. So this was a real passion project for him.
Okay. That's cool. I mean, he definitely drives the movie. And it's sort of, it kind of makes sense to me with, like, I think my sense of who he is rooted in Dr. Strangelove. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense to me that this would be just like a role that he would want to do.
Yeah.
The kind of comedy that he seems to enjoy.
And it's easy to think of Dr. Strangelove and go like, oh, Peter Sellers is that one that goes big and broad. And I mean, that's true in the Dr. Strangelove character in that movie, but he's playing several other characters as well. And they don't all go big and broad, right? He has other characters that are much more muted, and none as muted and quiet as this character is, certainly. But it kind of, it's just him showing off how he's a master of all these different comedic styles, actually. And he's incredible. He was nominated for an Oscar for this movie. He didn't win. I haven't looked what his competition was, but I don't even care. I wish he had won an Oscar. It's ridiculous that he didn't win an Oscar.
Yeah, I can't believe I've never seen this movie because I don't know. It seems like one of those movies that you would have seen at some point, right?
Yeah.
And I know I've heard Chauncey Gardner, the name, referenced many times as in contexts of like, some politician being a Chauncey Gardner figure, where the implication usually being that their success is basically due to luck and happenstance and not due to their own talents.
Yeah.
But gosh, yeah, just very, God, I don't know. It's just it's a kind of comedy that you don't see a lot of, right? Because it's really hard to do. There's like, it's hard to do. And I often even like, so for example, this is the director who made Harold and Maude, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah. Hal Ashby. Yep.
And that's a movie that I don't really find to be that funny. And I think it's not trying to be as funny. I think it's trying to be more dramatic, although there is a lot of humor in that movie. I don't think I would call it a satire. I think I'd call it a drama with comedic elements.
Sure.
But this, I don't know. It's just hitting a very specific spot for me that is very rarely hit as successfully as this.
Yeah. I mean, I love what it's saying, I mean, it's like, once again, I think it sometimes in satire, I think like we're going out of our way to be so pointed and destructive and ripping apart the system that we don't stop and like do something like emotional and profound. And the thing that I love about this movie is that it can be both, is that this is like that it is taking a shot at the privileged elite of both economical society and in our government, while also being this beautiful meditation on what does it mean to be alive. What does it mean to exist? What does it mean to be there? Right, that's the title, being there. Right, he's just being there, just existing. What does that mean? And how can a person who just is there, just is there in the kind of in the moment always, how he can have different effects on people. Because I don't know, the most interesting character from that perspective to me is the Shirley MacLaine character, who, oftentimes it is played for laughs. It is very funny that like she puts so much romantic and emotional weight in things that he's doing and saying that are meaningless and nothing. And again, the sex scene, Shirley MacLaine on the floor pleasuring herself while he's doing exercise. He's emulating the exercise from the TV on the bed. It is a thing that I will never stop laughing at for the rest of my life, because it's just delightful.
Yeah.
But also, she is this incredibly lonely woman whose husband is dying and has been dying for a very long time, and she is desperate for companionship. And he is able to be that person for her. So it's definitely a joke. It's definitely silly, but it's also meaningful to her.
Yeah.
And I find that really beautiful. I really do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's what's kind of interesting is you can laugh at, I forget all the characters' names. Her character and
is Eve.
Eve and her husband, Ben. Eve and Ben. So you can laugh at them, but I don't think the movie is really laughing at them all that much, because but both of them sort of just want to be seen. Like Ben, like you kind of pointed out earlier, he kind of talks at Chance, and then Chance nods and every once in a while says something vaguely in agreement, and Ben it's like the first time he feels like seen and heard, and the same goes for her, where he's like this pillar of strength to her, and all it is they're just projecting what they really need from another person in their life that they're just not getting, I think, because everybody is too wrapped up in their own bullshit, and he's just being there, right? And that's and I love the last scene that she's in, where she's like monologuing about what an amazing man he is, and how he has like changed her life and opened her up spiritually and romantically, and it's just so beautiful. And he's just existing. he's not but it's not entirely true or fair to say like he's not doing any of those things. It's like, well, for her he did, but all it took was for him to just sort of like be present for them to appreciate, and also there's the fact that like he likes both of them. He does genuinely. He just doesn't like them in the way that they kind of imagine that he does. So I think it's just this interesting commentary about what we're looking for in other people, and what we get out of our relationships or don't get out of our relationships. And so it's, on the one hand, it's this biting satire about like politics, but I think it's also more broadly, and in some sense, maybe more interestingly, this statement about humans and our loneliness and what we're looking for.
Yeah, because ultimately the reason why Chance is able to get away with this, not a phrase that's not entirely true, but for the purpose of this argument, let's say it's true, is because people are so desperate to see what they want to see and have their wants kind of reflected back to them. And so he can go on a talk show, and what the host of the talk show wants is someone to say something profound and meaningful that gets everyone interested, and Chance can be that for him. What what Ben Rand wants is a companion that will agree with him on his politics stuff. What Shirley wants, or Eve, sorry, wants is a person that will be strong and not ill, that will stand at like it's a biting commentary on I think a lot of the essential loneliness of existence, and how a person like this can waltz into these situations and just be that while doing nothing, while for the most part watching television, which
Yeah.
is like, which is what he spends most of his time in the movie doing, which is in and of itself an interesting commentary, right? That Chauncey's entire understanding of existence is through the television. That is his whole life. That is the thing he cares about more than anything else, is watching television.
Yeah.
And he uses TV to learn, to be entertained, to emulate. I mean, like the wonderful scene where he kisses Eve solely because he's watching two people on screen kiss.
Right.
Which, by the way, the movie was the Thomas Crown Affair, which was directed by Hal Ashby. I just thought that was delightful.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I don't know. It's I think a lot of times bad satire like gets too wrapped up in, we need to show how terrible all these people are. And I'm not arguing that some of these people aren't terrible, but we need the part of the satire is creating this world in which these terrible people are doing these things, and we're exposing that terrible through our satire. But what I liked about this movie was it's definitely that, but we still treat them as humans and characters and people with feelings. And I don't know, it's so good.
Yeah. That's the you were mentioning earlier how slowly it begins, and I was actually, the first maybe 20-30 minutes I was like, wow, this is one of those 70s movies with the 70s pacing. But then I ended up kind of appreciating that in retrospect, because it allowed us to have that grounding in the character and the pathos of like, this is a poor guy who doesn't understand what's happening to him. This kind of sneaky real estate lawyer guy comes in and sort of fast talks him out onto the street, and he clearly doesn't know what to do, and it's barely funny up until, like you said, like 45 minutes into the movie, and then it kind of start like the motor starts to rev, and you start to kind of get like, oh, I see where we're going with this, but it takes so long to get there. But it's good that it did, because like your point here is that it doesn't lose itself in just trying to be a laugh a minute.
Yeah, into the absurdity of the situation, that's what I love about it. It allows the situation to be astronomically absurd without really like gesturing towards you in a way that's like, isn't this absurd? What's happening here? Isn't it? And like, that's what I mean by how different it is from Doctor Strangelove, which is a movie I love and is in the canon, and we talked about last year and I adore, but it is such a different kind of satire, because that was like, I felt like kind of gesturing towards all this and being like, isn't this fucking nuts? Isn't this insane that this is happening and these are the people in charge and this is what's going on? And this movie is saying similar things, but I don't know. It just didn't feel to me like it was going like, look at that. Look at it. It just felt like it was just quietly making its point. And it was its ability to make the point over and over again that I found really fascinating. The ability to expose the central humanity of these people, both for good and for bad, that are in the top, positions of power in our country. Like the relationship between Peter Sellers' Chance and President Bobby is possibly my favorite relationship in the entire movie, because he waltzes in here. He has no idea who this guy is. And Peter Sellers is giving him, the double fisted handshake that he saw on TV. And the president reads that as a power move, right? Everything he does in the sequence, the president reads as a power move, that he's like, the really great line where he says, "Ben, have you gotten the chance?" "Yes." Like, even that he's reading as a power move, as him trying to stake his position in the room and push the president. And it happened. He's so effective at it, despite not doing anything, that it causes impotence in the president. He can't sleep with his wife because this man has just outmaneuvered him so expertly.
Yeah.
And this is the most powerful human being in the world, completely laid low by nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the point, right? It is the central, like that the most powerful man in the world is still a human being and can still completely misread and misinterpret a scene to the point where it totally defeats him, and he totally changes his policy position after a 5-minute conversation with a guy he doesn't know at all.
Yeah. I mean, Chauncey is a sort of mirror, you could say, where, the president emasculates himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
He sees himself the way he's afraid that this other guy sees him, when in fact no such thing is happening. It's just his own insecurity that destroys his confidence, and then other people get, people see what they either need to see or what they're afraid of seeing, or what they expect to see.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it works both dramatically and comedically. I mean, there are some just great jokes in the movie, though, just like straightforward. Like, I think my favorite exchange that's just like a perfect joke, because it got like a good, like, blurted out laugh out loud from me, was, and I'm not gonna get it right here, but it's basically like, it would be great if you would write a book about your thoughts, Mr. Gardner. And he's like, oh, I can't write. And the guy's like, oh yeah, no, I mean, nobody can anymore, right? But we have a ghostwriter who can help you, and I'll send you some of his work for you to read. I don't read. Oh yeah, who has the time anymore? And it's just like, it's like a perfect like double setup, double payoff. Like it was way funnier when Peter Sellers did it, honestly.
Of course.
But I think I like saw what the punchline was going to be, like a fraction of a second, or like, and like that to me is a great joke, actually. And there's a lot like that, where again it's all consistent with the logic of the movie, but it's just it's so good, it's so well written, it's so cleverly written. Like when he's talking with the Russian ambassador, and it's just every line is so cleverly written to have like dual meanings. Like throughout the whole movie, actually, generally there are two conversations happening, the conversation Chauncey thinks he's having and the conversation the other person thinks they're having, and it has to always be consistent, and that's really hard, and it must have been, it's just really impressive, actually.
Yeah. No, I love, I think when he says, all I've got left is that room upstairs, and Ben's interpretation of that is he's talking about heaven, right? It's like, the only thing I've got left to do is to die. And he's just talking about the literal room that they just put him in upstairs. Yeah, I mean, that's the cleverness of the writing, is it has that dual meaning. And to your point that you made earlier, it never breaks the rules, right? You could watch this movie just from the Chance the Gardener perspective, and everything would fall in line with what he thinks the conversation is about. And it never breaks those rules. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Highly recommended if the people listening haven't watched this movie that came out 50 years ago.
I did like when the maid Louise is watching him on the TV and is just like beside herself. It's just like, it's for sure a white man's world in America. Look at this guy. He can't read or write. He's got no brains at all. And look, he's on TV now.
That was great. I mean, and then of course that scene occurs and there's just no consequence from it, because it's like, that world is totally disconnected from this Washington bubble. So, and I don't think she would do anything about it anyway, because it doesn't matter to her.
Well, that's the amazing thing, right? Because you have the lawyer from the opening of the scene, and like at the time I was watching the movie, I was like, here's why we did this extended opening at the beginning and did everything with the lawyer, because he's the only one. Him and the lawyer and Louise, the maid, are the only ones that know who this guy is and where he came from. And so it's obviously setting up like the fact that, I don't know if this was true, but the blocking of the scene made it was true, that the Washington Post reporter is having a conversation about who this guy is in the same bar that the lawyer is talking to the doctor about exactly who this guy is. And so just the geography of that leads you to believe it's like, oh, they're going to realize they're talking about the same person. There's going to be this giant scandal and he's going to be exposed, and it will be embarrassing for everyone who was hoodwinked, quote unquote, by this guy. And yeah, the fact that the movie never goes there is interesting, in that I think part of the point of the satire is that no one will ever find this out, because they're all too stupid.
Yeah, I mean, even the real estate guy, I'm not sure if he was a lawyer or realtor or what he was exactly, but even he, despite having the most knowledge of almost anyone in the situation, rapidly convinces himself that Chance was just putting him on and messing with him, and that actually he is this brilliant genius. And in the first scene he was actually being misled, instead of believing that this current status quo is the illusion, which just tells you, like, you just kind of, people just believe what they see everybody else believing, right?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation he has with that girl he's in bed with, where he's like, it's the gardener, and she's like, yeah, John C. Gardner, and he's like, no, it's a real gardener. And her response to that is, he doesn't talk like one. And I was like, he's literally talking about plants and gardening. What do you mean he doesn't talk like a gardener?
It's so good. And then she's mad at him.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we're coming to the end of this conversation here, man. And it's like everyone's doing great performances in this. Peter Sellers is great. Shirley MacLaine is great. There's some actors in here I'd never seen. Melvin Douglas, who plays Ben Rand, is not an actor. Actually, I do recognize him. I recognized his face, but I wasn't sure where from.
I know the actor who was the doctor, Richard Allen Dysart. I believe he was in The Thing, wasn't he?
Yes,
he was.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I really recognize anybody else.
And then, of course, President Bobby's played by Jack Warden.
Yes.
Who was in a lot of things, but I think I'm just like, the thing I know him the most from is Pops in the movie Dirty Work, the Norm Macdonald movie Dirty Work. Even though he's like this incredibly talented, wonderful comedic actor, but like that's the first thing I watched of him that I remember him from.
Is this like me only knowing Bob Hoskins from Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Mario?
No, this is worse than that, I think.
Okay.
I think it's okay to know Bob Hoskins from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Mario, I don't know. But yeah, no, I loved this movie. I mean, Hal Ashby is an incredible director who, like, if we're kind of moving to the where would we vote phase of the conversation, he's an incredible director that made tons of absolutely incredible movies. I love Harold and Maude that you referenced. I really, really like that movie. Thomas Crown Affair and The Heat of the Night. Like, he's done just a bunch of different films. And I don't know if I'm like ready to say, oh, this was his best one, but I would be totally fine with this being in. I think it's an easy yes for me.
I won't argue with you there. Yeah, in terms of going into the canon, yeah, this is a movie that everybody should watch. I think it's probably pretty influential. It's very fun. It's very funny. Yeah. I've been thinking about it ever since I watched it. So yeah, definitely.
And Peter Sellers, man, Peter Sellers, what a talent! What an absolute talent! Have you watched any of the? We've had this conversation before. Every time we talk about Peter Sellers, we have this conversation, and I forget about it. Have you watched the Pink Panther movies?
I mean, I think I saw at least one of them when I was a kid, but I don't think that I watched them as an adult, so it barely counts.
I feel like we need to watch those movies.
Yeah.
At least, so there's this really interesting thing that happens in those movies, which is in the first Pink Panther movie, he plays Inspector Jacques Clouseau, and that's it's not that movie's not a comedy, because it is, but like he plays a much more muted version of the Clouseau character in that movie, but
Mhm.
like it was he's a side character. He's not the main role in the movie, but he was everyone's favorite part of the movie. And so like in all subsequent sequels, they just leaned into the Clouseau character. And as the movies continue on, he just gets more and more absurd and cartoonish and ridiculous, and to the point where like it eventually loses its value. But I think like watching the first one and then maybe the second one to see how they lean into that character a little bit more in that one would be a valuable thing that we could do one day.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds fun.
I think they're great movies. I really do. And I enjoyed the Steve Martin remake that came out in the 2000s. I thought that was stupidly hilarious.
Yeah, I think I've seen at least one of those. I mean, Steve Martin's great, right? You can't go wrong.
I love Steve Martin. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and he's even doing like he's playing up the later version of that character, the absolutely absurd version of the character. But he's Steve Martin, just having a great time pronouncing hamburger wrong 700 times.
We should actually just do Clouseau cast. We should just have an entire podcast dedicated to all movies in which Clouseau appears.
I would love this, actually. I think it'd be great. I don't know if any of our listeners would be interested in that at all, but I would, and that's all that matters.
It would be very fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think it's 2 yeses from us, right?
I agree. Yes.
All right. So now we turn it over to you folks. I urge you, if you're listening to this and wondering if you should see the movie and vote, or please do. I think this is one that our voter turnout is going to be a little bit lower than normal because this is a movie that probably not a lot of our audience has seen. But please go watch it. You're going to enjoy it. It's like $3. You can rent it and watch it, and it's a great time. And then vote. Head over to the link in the show notes, and it'll send you to our Patreon page. You do not need to be a patron to vote. It is open to the public, so just click that radio button and let us know. And of course, let us know why. If you voted yes or no, let us know what for. What did you think of this movie?
Yeah, can't wait to see the result.
Doof.
All right, Matt, it's a you, Mario.
Yes, so I wanted. I saw the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
Okay.
With my kids because of course I did.
Now, is it bros or is it brothers?
I'm pretty sure it's brothers, but there's like a joke with me personally where I always say it bros, which is why I always say Freeman Bros instead of Freeman Brothers, which is like it really should be Freeman Brothers.
Gotcha.
Obviously, but the joke is that I'm an idiot. So
I see.
And my kids really liked it, which is the main thing that matters here, actually. And so what was funny is, I took them to see them mostly out of a sense of paternal duty, that this is what you do when you have kids. You got to take them to see the movies that they're going to talk with their friends about, so they can feel like they're part of the culture. And as the movie starts, I'm like, okay, I always enjoy these kind of animated movies, even if they're not for me. And then pretty quickly, I was like, wait a minute. I grew up on Mario games. I love Mario. And it was pretty funny, honestly, because it was like it hadn't occurred to me that I love Mario. It was like I didn't know that I love Mario, but I do, because I've played Mario games my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Literally my whole life. My first memories are Mario games, not literally. I'm joking, but always loved it. And so this is one of those places where when the movie throws all the references at you, which it definitely does, I'm just like, yay, my childhood. I'm so happy. And it's just obviously one of those simple stories, but it doesn't matter. It's fun. It uses, in my opinion, I think it uses the references in a way that makes it more fun than just like, I remember that. Like there's a sequence where Luigi is like lost, and basically everything about it is like harkening back to the Luigi's Mansion games. And it's like, oh, this, like this makes sense. Like within the context of the story, it's not just a like winking at the camera thing, although it is also that, so like I'm not saying that the game that the movie is not just like utterly crammed full of references, because it totally is, but like it's one of the times when I just don't mind it at all, because
Sure.
It's working on me.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Obviously, I have not seen the movie, but the movie is incredibly popular.
Mhm.
It's currently at $720 million worldwide, so it's going to cross the $1 billion mark. It very possibly in a year that is absolutely stacked with giant franchise movies, it has a possibility of being the number one movie of the year, which is insane. But I would like to say for the record that we absolutely called this. We
Yeah.
called this when we talked about this movie months and months and months ago, when everyone was like, Chris Pratt, why would you cast Chris Pratt as Mario? I was like, you're not going to care. No
Yeah.
one's going to care. He's going to be fine, and it's going to work, and
Yeah.
everyone's going to like the movie.
I basically forgot that it was Chris Pratt, and I basically forgot that it was Jack Black, except for the singing parts where, that's definitely Jack Black's singing voice, but that just makes it better because Jack Black is great.
I do think it's really interesting that the marketing of this movie has really embraced the fact that everyone loves the Bowser wrote a song for Princess Peach aspect of the movie, which felt like to me, and again, I haven't seen the movie, but it felt like that was supposed to be a reveal within the movie itself, that his grand plan is actually just because he's in love with Princess Peach.
Yeah.
But like the memification of that character and that song was so strong that the marketing of the movie just like steered into it. And now like they released a single for Peaches, and I see it everywhere, even though I haven't seen the movie. Not that I care about spoilers in the fucking Mario movie, but I just think it's funny.
Yeah, I haven't noticed that actually, but
it's everywhere, man. It's everywhere.
I think that's definitely something that resonated with kids, because my kids have been singing the Peaches song also. I mean, it's good. It's something that works with kids, right? And that's like that's why it works, right? The kids, when the movie was over, I told them, I'm constantly telling them trivia that they couldn't care less about, and I'm like, hey, that was Chris, what's his face, Chris Pratt, and they're like, who's Chris Pratt? And I'm like, Star-Lord, and also Emmett, and they're like, oh, okay, end of conversation. And then I'm like. And then I'm like, yeah, and how about Jack Black? And they're like, who was Jack Black in the movie? And I'm like, Bowser. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So it's just like, and of course they don't care, right?
Yeah.
Of course. Like, when did you start caring about what actors were in things? I probably did when I was in my early teens, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very funny to me that people thought that would ever matter.
It's very silly. And I knew it was overblown. Like, the man has done voice acting before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was silly, but I'm glad that you enjoyed the movie. I will see it eventually, of course. I think this is really interesting because we live in this time now where like video game adaptations are starting to be good, actually. I mean, we just had the Prestige TV Last of Us show that I did a episode of this podcast with Elliot on a few weeks ago. That was really good and really successful. We have this movie now that is, of course, going to spawn so many sequels. Matt, they're going to make so many sequels to this movie. It's going to be insane. You're going to be sick of it in 5 years, but for now it's exciting and new.
Yeah, I probably am. And I kind of want to just, I don't know. I want to take the right tone here, because like, I don't think this is a great movie. I thought I enjoyed watching it. I feel the same way toward it that I feel about like the Gru movies, where I'm like, that was fun. that made me feel a couple of emotions, and that's it, and that's all and like that's what it's trying to be, and it accomplishes that. I'm not going to say like, oh, this is as good as the Last of Us TV show. Like, it's not. It's definitely not. But like, let's just grow up, right? Let's just have an adult conversation about what these things are.
And I mean, I'm not even, obviously there's a difference in like goals with those two things that are judging them on a similar plane is absurd, but like judging them as like successful business ventures, I don't think is absurd, because like video games have long been seen as like the doldrums of the adaptation market, right? Like no one can get them right. Like even when they do well financially, They're just kind of pretty universally hated, actually. And it seems like recently, we had the Sonic movie and the sequel, which were both very well received and made just absolute gobs of money. They're making a Knuckles spin-off movie, which is just the fucking craziest thing I've ever heard of, but sure, go for it.
Yeah.
This one comes out now. We've got The Last of Us, like we talked about. I just really feel like maybe finally at last we've kind of figured out how to tell these stories in a way that people like them and they make good money. And it comes at a time when all the superhero movie stuff seems to be on a downswing a little bit here. I don't want to draw too many conclusions from this, but the Shazam movie bombed. It did horrible. No one cared about Shazam 2 at all. The Ant-Man movie was really disappointing in the returns. And so you're at this place right now where in this world of people are caring less about Marvel and less about the superhero things, and suddenly you have big giant video game franchise that slams its claim down like Mario doing a butt stomp, and like that's interesting, right? That this could be a signal of some new thing that's going to happen in Hollywood. I might be overreacting here. I probably am, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was thinking this is probably the first time in maybe 15 years or something that I've gone to see 2 movies on 2 consecutive weekends. And it was Dungeons and Dragons last weekend and Mario this weekend.
Yeah, that's another example. It's not a video game, but it's a game adaptation, right?
It's a game. It's not burdened with a bunch of like cultural crap. It's just like nobody hates it, right? That's and that's the funny thing about the MCU at this point is I still haven't seen Quantumania.
Me neither.
Because I'm just like, for me, it just doesn't compel me. But like Dungeons and Dragons, I hear anything even mildly positive about a Dungeons and Dragons movie, and I'm like, oh shit, yes. Like I like Dungeons and Dragons. I'd like to watch that. Sure, it's fresh. I haven't seen it before 100 times, and it's got actors. Great. Yeah, Mario movie, cool. It's new and different, and yeah, no, I don't know what the wave is here that we're gesturing at, because I don't know if, again, I don't think it's just like things that are games, but I think it is maybe things that people don't already have a lot of baggage attached to.
Sure. Well, I mean, this superhero thing was always going to have a time period, right? Like Westerns were the biggest thing in the world in Hollywood for a decade, and they made hundreds and hundreds of Westerns, and then someday someone woke up and said, fuck Westerns, I'm done. And there's barely any Westerns released these days. And so the superhero thing had a shelf life. And I don't know if we've reached the end of that shelf life. I think we've reached this really interesting plateau. And I say this knowing that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is about to come out, and I would guess is going to do big numbers because it is, the marketing looks good. The trailers are solid. It's billing itself as the end of a trilogy. That we're going to say goodbye to these characters after that. And I think that's a great way to drum up interest in it, because I want to see it. And I really have not had any interest in any MCU thing for a while now, but I want to go see that movie for sure. So I think that movie's going to do very well. Everything else, like there's a lot of unknowns this year. There's the Flash movie is coming out. That's going to have fucking Keaton's Batman in it. Is that going to do well? No idea. They're making a Blue Beetle movie that's coming out this year, Matt. There's no way that's going to do well. There's a lot of unknowns right now, and I mean, you look at movies like Super Mario Brothers kind of sitting here taking over, and you're like, are we moving on to a new type of big blockbuster entertainment? I don't know.
Yeah, could be. It is. I want to now immediately contradict myself, and I'm just kind of noticing that like Mario and Dungeons and Dragons, can't say that word, are 2 properties that are actually extremely popular.
Yeah.
But for similar reasons, they haven't had a film adaptation in a million years. Both of them, they had film adaptations that, depending on who you talk to, sucked and just objectively did poorly financially. And they both of these properties said, well, that was a bad idea. Let's not do that again.
We're
For a long
done
time.
forever. We're never doing it
We're,
again.
we're never doing that again. And then years passed, and the market was able to develop a hunger for Dungeons and Dragons movie, Mario movie. Think Mario movie. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. Whereas if it seems like every other property of a comparable size has already had 6 movies shoved down your throat. That's not exactly true, because like there's never been a Zelda movie that I'm aware of. Like there's never been a Metal Gear Solid movie, right? Like there's other
No.
things you could do that probably that have like a cultural consciousness about them, but that they've never tried. It's just I'm just, as I'm thinking about this, I'm noticing that like people have always liked these 2 specific things. It's just there was a long lack of movie.
Isn't that weird? Isn't it weird that there's never been a Zelda movie? And I think there's most definitely going to be a Zelda movie after this. Like, no one at Nintendo is going to be able to look at $1 billion and be like, well, we just shouldn't do this with Zelda. They're going to find a way to do it and make it work. It is so interesting. And I mean, the same thing happened with Star Wars, right? Like the reason why The Force Awakens, despite being a just okay movie, but the reason why that is like the 5th highest grossing film of all time is because we hadn't had Star Wars in decades. And so you got to play the new Star Wars chord when you were hyping up this movie.
Yeah.
And that quickly wore off. And I'm wondering, like, all these things eventually wear off, they get oversaturated. Like that happens to anything ever. I'm wondering if the number of things that we have to entertain ourselves these days, the sheer rate of the news cycle means that the shine of that thing wears off so quickly now, like that. It's like, maybe it was like with 10 years of Star Wars and we're sick of Star Wars again. And maybe now it's like 3 years of Mario and we're going to be like, oh, the sheen of Mario is worn off and I'm really not interested in Mario movies anymore. I don't know. It feels like it's going to go so quickly.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I think we may be in an era where they start to kind of pick some of this low-hanging fruit, you could call it, I guess, in the form of properties that people like and would be willing to give a chance.
Yeah.
But they always overdo it, right? It's they can't help overdoing it.
Yeah.
It's what always happens. I mean, that's basically what happened with Westerns. It's like, oh, you people like Westerns, we'll make so many Westerns, and their quality will degrade because we're making so many of them, and then you'll get bored and you'll stop paying to see them. And the same thing arguably happened with the MCU, or is happening with the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sort of gold rush mentality, sort of wildcatting mentality, where it's like once a certain thing starts working, they're going to mash that button until it stops working.
Now here's an idea, Matt. Harry Potter TV series.
Now, I think people have said that that's a bad idea, and I'm not altogether convinced that that's a bad idea. The only wrinkle for me is I still don't understand how TV series make money. So
I'm closer to you than not with this. I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I think it's a depressing idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know we talked about this last week, but I'll hit this beat again. It just makes me sad that like it is very possible that some of the most talented writers and directors and actors and camera crew people are going to spend a literal decade of their careers basically going through a book that's 20 years old and just recreating it for the screen again. Like there's something about that that's really depressing to me, actually. Like, I don't know. It could be great, and I think it's probably going to end up being well. I mean, there's the other point. I was listening to a podcast talking about this today, actually, that was like, maybe they're never actually planning on making that thing. Maybe all these fucking streaming companies these days are just like playing short-term gains where they're just going to announce a shitload of shows, and they'll get the stock bump from the announcing of the thing, and then whether or not they actually ever make the thing is almost irrelevant from that point on.
Yeah, maybe. It's entirely possible. Yeah, I don't know. I get what you're saying about it feeling depressing, that you're just going to keep you're literally pushing the literal same button when you
Yeah.
remake the thing,
Mhm.
right? It's a little dispiriting to imagine all these artists just kind of hitting copy on the fax machine or the
Yeah.
photocopier. I mean, um,
Yeah.
I did look up and I was googling some things and saw that Oscar Isaac wants to make a Metal Gear Solid movie and be Solid Snake. So that's something for us
That
to
could
look
be
forward
cool. I
to.
mean, that could be cool. Like,
Could be.
the thing about Metal Gear Solid is it's such a diverse like the stories of those games are so fucked up that you could really do anything and
Yeah.
it would feel like a Metal Gear Solid thing. So yeah, there's plenty of potential here, and I am kind of excited to see where they go. I think, you know, a lot of these things are going to be not very good, but I'm glad Mario was enjoyable, at least. I know it wasn't like the best movie ever, and I think it's really interesting. There's a Pixar movie coming out this year called Element, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like nobody's talking about that movie. I feel like Disney's really fucked Pixar over lately.
Yeah.
And I hope it does really well, but I have this sneaking fear that it's not going to do well at all, and it's going to be another Lightyear situation.
Yeah, I feel like the way they're releasing them is just not giving them a chance.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. It's very frustrating because like they never make a bad movie, but they market them so strangely and inadequately that they don't make as much money as they should. It's almost like Disney's treating them as this sort of luxury brand or something, where it's like it's like we don't care if they make money because they're like they're art. And it's like, well, yeah, but you could also have them make money if you marketed them properly, because people always like them.
Yeah.
When they bother to see them. Yeah.
You want to know something wild?
Yeah.
David Lowery, who directed Pete's Dragon, the live action remake of that Disney story, who directed a movie I loved called A Ghost Story, and who directed The Green Knight, one of my favorite movies from 2 years ago, has a movie coming out to Disney Plus tomorrow called Peter Pan and Wendy.
Okay.
And I don't think anyone knows this movie exists.
Yeah.
It's just like this very critically acclaimed popular director made a Peter Pan movie that's coming to Disney. I think Jude Law is playing Hook. And I only stumbled upon this the other day. I had no idea this movie even existed. And it's so weird to me. I mean, I know it's another Peter Pan movie, which they made like 7,000 of, but it's David Lowery. And like, I don't know, it's so weird that there's so much stuff out there that stuff like this is just completely getting buried and disappearing. And I what a weird time we live in.
Yeah. There are too many movies.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's I'm not really saying that as a joke. There are so many movies that it is impossible for all of them to break even, because there aren't that many people going to see them, and yet they're not going to stop making them. It's weird. It's a weird time.
Yeah, they can't stop making them. They have to keep going forward.
Yeah. So interesting.
Do you know there's a Haunted Mansion movie coming out this year?
I don't know anything. Every once in a while I watch one of those like trailer supercuts that's like all the trailers of all the movies that are coming out soon, but I haven't watched one of those recently, and therefore I don't know anything about what's coming out.
Let me read to you the cast of the Haunted Mansion movie, and you will be shocked that you didn't know this movie exists.
Okay.
Rosario Dawson, Jamie Lee Curtis, Winona Ryder, Jared Leto, Owen Wilson, Danny DeVito, Lakeith Stanfield, Tiffany Haddish, Hassan Minaj. Holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I should have seen a trailer for this at some point.
It comes out in July.
That's so funny. I mean, I just saw 2 movies in the theater and I didn't see a trailer for this, right? Like, well, like if you're not going to see an ad for a movie, then when are you going to see it? That's so weird. It's so weird.
Absolutely wild. So yeah, I mean that was a far-ranging conversation about your enjoyment of Mario and also the state of the industry, which is where these conversations always seem to go. But I enjoyed it. I'm glad you liked Mario.
Yeah, Mario is just a thought-provoking topic. I think I walked out with a big smile on my face. So for whatever that's worth, that is my review.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for us this week. I had a thing I wanted to talk about, but we've gone a little long, so we'll save that for another time.
Okay, sounds good.
That's all we have for you guys this week. If you have any opinions on the Super Mario Bros, as Matt says, movie, or on Hal Ashby's being there, you can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia. You can also go to the subreddit, that's r/doofmedia, and respond in the thread for this episode.
Yeah, if you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to subscribe and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us financially, you can consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. You can head over to patreon.com/doofmedia. You are already going to be over there as you are voting for being there to be in the canon or not. So while you're there, why not throw a few bucks our way and help us keep the lights on, keep this thing going. And you can possibly become a member of the council that brings films to us. So if you're listening and you're like, why did they do this movie? What is this? That was a weird movie to do. Why? You can change that. You can make your voice heard.
Yeah, you can exert your will.
Become your own gardener.
That's right. You got to cultivate the garden. You got to prune the plants. You got to pull the weeds. Anyway,
life is a state of mind, Matt.
But life is a state of mind. That was great.
Putting that on a tombstone is the most ironic thing in the world.
Yes. Also, please consider rating and reviewing the Doofcast on Apple Podcasts. Every review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us this week. I believe next week we are going to be taking a look at the most recent M. Night Shyamalan film, A Knock at the Cabin. It's out now on Peacock. I have already seen it, but Matt is going to be able to watch it now. So I think we want to do that because we make it a point to talk about all M. Night Shyamalan movies.
Yes, we love M. Night Shyamalan on this podcast.
It is true. And we will talk about that next week. We'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.